Senator Hawley.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Johnson. Mr. Whitaker, let me start with some press reporting. I've read press claims that managers at both FAA and Boeing often agreed, I'm going to quote now, to table disagreements about technical issues in order to avoid delays, and that the relationship between your agency and Boeing was, quote, almost fraternal, end quote. Does that strike you as accurate in the time that you've been in your position?
Well, in the time that I've been in my position, and particularly since January 5th, that I would not use that to characterize the relationship, no.
Have you found, in looking back at your agency's conduct, are you worried about not the sort of rigorous oversight that's necessary being provided?
I think there have been various chapters in that relationship, and I think particularly with the development of the MAX, some of the delegation of authorities that took place, and some of the processes in that era showed some culture problems between the two. So we're very focused on making sure that happens, and we also monitor to make sure we're not having regulatory capture and rotating our inspectors and our executives to ensure that.
Let me ask you about some whistleblower allegations. Since Mr. Calhoun testified here back in June, a number of whistleblowers have contacted my office. One whistleblower told my office that Boeing would routinely try to schedule inspections based on which FAA investigators were coming, because some FAA investigators were known to be more inclined to provide sign-offs. I think we've got a quote about this. When this whistleblower brought this up to Boeing, namely the sort of disparate treatment by different investigators, he was brought into an office and told, don't push and do whatever your career can handle. My question is, does the FAA now, or has it in the past, allow Boeing to schedule which inspections occur with specific investigators for certifying aircraft?
There are various types of inspections. Some of those are large paperwork inspections. Those tend to get scheduled. They're fairly intensive, weeks-long audits. The primary inspection happens on the floor, and particularly now that we have inspectors on the floor. I visited with the inspectors in Charleston and walked the floor with them. They have the opportunity to join the briefing meetings in the morning, the various level of management meetings, but more importantly, engage actually with the employees. So I think in this new regime we've had in place for the last 9 months, we have a much more of an ability to have a spontaneous inspection procedures and get better data that way.
Okay, so it sounds like it's a yes, maybe as to paperwork inspections. As to in-person inspections, you are not currently allowing there to be scheduled inspections. Is that right?
Those are more spontaneous, and in fact, if an inspector sees something he doesn't like, it on the spot, he can say, "Can I see the paperwork? Can I talk to the person that did this?" and effectively go through an inspection at that point.
Have you allowed
quality systems for Boeing, which are basically auditing their manuals and procedures, and also similar inspections that happen with suppliers?
Let me ask you about another whistleblower report. This whistleblower, a different person, told my office that she would report scores of technical issues, but when she did that, those reports were not well received by Boeing. No surprise, given how Boeing has behaved. Here's the thing that particularly interested me. This whistleblower stated that if you go to the FAA, I'm going to quote her now, if you don't say you fear retaliation during an initial call with the FAA, you don't get whistleblower protection. I think we've got that quote as well. If you don't say you fear retaliation during the initial call with the FAA, you don't get whistleblower protection. Is that accurate?
That is not accurate. You get full whistleblower protection with each outreach.
Okay, so the FAA is not requiring whistleblowers to explicitly state that they fear retaliation in order to get whistleblower protection as defined by law. Is that correct?
Sir. Yes, sir.
What are you doing to ensure that any whistleblower who comes forward to you, whether from Boeing or anywhere else, is guaranteed the full whistleblower protections they are entitled to under the statute?
In 2023, we beefed up our department, added a number of inspectors, and they're all very well trained on what the protocols are. And really the key to this system working is having that confidentiality. It is really the cornerstone of the system working. So we encourage people to speak up, and we are bending over backwards to make sure they're protected.
Let me ask you about another whistleblower report. This whistleblower says that when she would go to the FAA with her concerns, these are reports of technical issues, other corner cutting by Boeing, that she often got relegated to an undesirable role. In other words, she was retaliated against. In one example, for instance, she did not receive overtime in her new role, which resulted in a $30,000 pay hit. And this whistleblower alleged Boeing routinely conducts retaliation in this way without raising any formal alarm bells. In other words, tries to retaliate, but sort of on the sly, as it were, and evade any FAA accountability or scrutiny. Are you aware of things like this happening?
I'm aware of allegations of retaliation, and it has been a focus as we look at the safety culture change that has to happen. A key part of that is a robust whistleblower program that does not have retaliation. That's going to involve training of management so they know how to treat employees. And anytime we get an allegation of retaliation, we bring in the Department of Labor and OSHA to investigate as well.
And so has that happened recently? I mean, are you investigating? Have you brought in other relevant federal agencies to investigate possible cases of retaliation as it relates to Boeing?
We routinely would bring in the Department of Labor if there's a retaliation allegation.
You say routinely, but I guess I'm looking for, as it relates to Boeing, while you have been in your role, have there been instances where you've had to go after them for potential retaliation?
I can get that information and provide it to your office.
Okay, that would be helpful. In my time remaining here, let me just ask about something you testified to back in June when you were before the Commerce Committee. You were talking about changing your approach to inspecting Boeing production facilities, but one former square feet, how many inspectors do you have on the floor at Renton, for example?
I could give you the precise number. We currently have 11, and by the end of the year, we plan to have 13 inspectors there.
So you have 11 on a floor of 1 million square feet. There are 12,000 employees at Renton. Are those numbers adequate?
Our current assessment is this is a good start, and these inspectors are able to walk the line and talk to employees, and we feel like we're pretty well covered, but we will continue to evaluate that number as we go forward.
Well, my time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator Johnson, for allowing me to ask these questions. I just want to say in closing that, listen, what's happened at Boeing is absolutely unacceptable. As I said to the CEO when he was sitting right where you are, for the CEO to have gotten a 45% pay increase as he did year over year while he wasn't paying his machinists out of the Pacific Northwest, while his planes are literally falling out of the sky, is absolutely reprehensible. They are destroying, he is destroying a great American company, and I don't buy this stuff that Boeing has a culture problem. Boeing has a leadership problem, and I just want to make sure, Mr. Whitaker, I'm glad you're doing the job you're doing. I want to make sure your agency is holding their feet to the fire. I worry about these reports that there's this sort of fratty culture between the FAA and Boeing. We need tough oversight there, and we're counting on you to provide that because, frankly, the American public deserve it when they get into an airplane, and the good people who work for Boeing deserve to be protected. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thanks, Senator Hawley. I'm going to yield to the ranking member. Thank you.
So I guess I'll take partially correct. You know, listen, I come at this with a different perspective. I ran a manufacturing plant for 30 years. We supplied the medical device industry. We had all kinds of quality audits. We had quality systems in place. I understand them. And there is a point of diminishing returns here, too. You have somebody check the quality control person, and who's going to check the checker? And who's going to check the checker of the checker? So, again, you had to put in reasonable systems. I appreciate the questioning of my colleagues trying to find out, okay, what do these inspectors do? I'll drill down a little bit further. First of all, I would think FAA would rely on the fact that we've got these inspectors walking around. If there's really a problem, you would hope Boeing employees would come up to an inspector and mention something. First of all, does that happen quite frequently?
I think the sense is that they have felt, I don't know of specific incidents, no.
Do you get the sense that currently at Boeing there's a hostility toward FAA inspectors or a sense of cooperation or something between that?
I suspect you might find all of those range of reactions, but our inspectors are reporting that they're finding a cooperative attitude, but they're primarily focused on understanding what's going on the floor and talking to employees.
Is there a difference in general attitude between manufacturing sites? I mean, is one of the manufacturing sites better? Are they coming up to speed quicker? Are they engaging in that cultural change quicker than others?
The only thing I can comment on that is this comprehensive plan has rolled out with the 737 on those particular sites, but it is now being rolled out in all of the lines as well to cover all their models.
How many different inspections are there, let's say, on a particular airliner? Do you have any idea?
So the 737 has almost 1,600 inspections in the quality inspections in the manufacturing
So
process.
how many of those would be 100% inspection versus like some kind of statistical sampling?
I can come back to you with that information.
Is that something the FAA agrees on with the basically agree with it at this point in time?
They have added about 30% more inspection points over the last couple of years, so we do agree with that, yes.
Okay. I mean, that's the way the system's it has to work. I mean, you can't have layer after layer after layer. At some point in time, you have to rely on a system. And really, the proof's in the pudding. One of the things I was disappointed with the airline CEOs not coming in here, again, I wanted somebody to talk about the safety record. Again, I don't have the stats in front of me, but it always seemed like there were, these airline disasters occurred in threes. I mean, we literally have not had an airline disaster in quite some time. And other than really the 737 MAX, which I want to get into, I mean, do you have the safety stats? Can you spout those off to us today? Or?
As far as major air accidents?
Yeah, passenger safety per traveled mile. Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's anything close to airline travel, is there?
No, I think in the U.S. it's been about 15 years since a major U.S. accident.
But again, just miles traveled, it's the safest way to go.
Yeah.
You're a lot safer in an airplane than you are in a car.
Yeah, and it's worth mentioning that the airlines have been engaging more with Boeing. Many of them have put inspectors in the plant, so they also have inspectors walking the floor.
That's what I wanted to hear from the airline industry. Now, what are you doing to check your supplier? What are you doing in terms of your maintenance? Again, I still encourage them to come forward. The goal of this is to help Boeing succeed and restore confidence in the traveling public. I do want to cover the 737, the MCAS system, because I still don't understand that. I mean, you had the Lion Air crash in October 2018. 4.5 months later, you had the Ethiopian crash. Having read this in hindsight, it seemed like that MCAS system was a real challenge, and people knew that this was an issue, correct?
So I, of course, wasn't there at the time, but I have had to do a fair amount of digging into that, and I know it's been very well investigated, and I think the consensus is that Boeing withheld important safety information from the FAA during the certification process. And had that been...
Okay, again, you weren't there, so you're not going to get blamed for this. Do you think the FAA was not aggressive enough or firm enough? Was there too cozy a relationship? Was this industry capture of a regulatory agency that Boeing felt they could withhold that information?
My understanding was it was a deliberate withholding of information, so there's no indication that anyone at FAA had knowledge of it.
Understand they didn't have knowledge of it, but again, was that because there's just too cozy a relationship that Boeing thought they could get away with it?
Not my impression.
So what has changed now? Because they still are employing the MCAS system, correct?
So the MCAS system went through a number of technical changes, and I think the big change was pilot training because the pilots were unaware of how this system operated.
That MCAS system basically caused those airlines to nosedive, right? And one of the reasons they didn't have one of the indicators, I mean, those airliners cut some corners, and they ordered their planes with only one of these, was it airspeed indicator? I mean, one of the indicators, correct?
Angle of attack indicator, and the best practices would have been to have a redundant system in manufacture, yes.
So now that's required, correct?
Yes.
Has there been an upgrade to the software itself significant so that the training is easier, so it doesn't rely so much on, again, this is kind of what's it stand for? Mechanical, I wrote it down here somewhere, but it's really about an automated system. I mean, an automated system that requires extensive pilot training to prevent it from nosediving into the ground is not a very good automated system. I mean, have they improved that thing?
Well, I don't have great detail on that. I understand there were software updates, of redundant systems on the angle of attack indicator and extensive pilot training.
Well, I'll point it out to you, to Boeing, to the airlines. I would like to understand this, seeing as I fly these things quite a bit. I still don't understand it. I still don't understand what they did to give me the complete confidence going, okay, they have this totally fixed. So I would like that if you could,
We can
do that
provide
from
you
the FAA's perspective, kind of lay it out for us, issue a report. Again, the goal here is to provide the confidence to the public because we've actually corrected these problems, and we agree that these problems have been corrected.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much.
Senator Ossoff.
Just picking up there for a moment on MCAS, do I recall correctly that not only had FAA not been informed of the scope of the system and the certification process, but also the carriers and flight crews had not been fully briefed or briefed at all on the functioning of the system?
That's my understanding, Senator.
And was the decision not to inform flight crews of how the system functioned linked to the decision to withhold information from FAA?
I don't know that they were necessarily linked, but my understanding was there were economic considerations that if pilot training was required, there were financial penalties, and that drove part of that decision.
Who at Boeing made the decision to withhold that information from FAA, and who at Boeing made that decision not to inform carriers and flight crews of how the system functioned?
So I was in the private sector during that time, so I wasn't involved in the particular instance. I don't have that level of detail, but we can certainly provide.
But FAA must, right?
We have information we can certainly provide, sir.
Okay. Will you provide that to the subcommittee, please?
Yes, we will.
You mentioned that the FAA's oversight became, I think the words you used were too reactive, too passive, unable to adapt to change. What kind of change would the FAA have been able to adapt to had it been more agile in this case?
With respect to the January 5th incident?
With respect to your oversight of Boeing quality control over the last decade? And every time I say your, I know you haven't been there for 10 years, and you joined last year. So.
I think when I talk about technology evolution, I'm talking about some of the technology in the cockpit. For example, there have been advancement in auto landing technology, advancements in technology and types of aircraft that we're seeing. So we're starting to see new forms of aircraft like advanced air mobility. We're seeing drones. We're seeing supersonic flight. So all these technological changes are presenting challenges, and our system needs to be flexible enough to adapt to those challenges.
But a lack of visibility into potential decline in quality control related to the incidents that this subcommittee has been focused on have not been related to these sort of high-profile next-generation evolutions of technology, right? It's about whether or not the manufacturer and its contractors have been implementing best industrial practices, correct?
It is, and I think in that situation, we're really talking about utilizing better data to have a better idea of what's actually going on the factory floor.
What kind of data would have revealed to the FAA, had it been collected, that you needed a more aggressive approach to examine the industrial processes?
So since the January 5th incident, when we asked Boeing to put together this comprehensive plan, there are now 6 key performance indicators that we monitor constantly that tell us how they're doing on traveled work, on employee training, on ticketed items at the end of production. Those metrics give us a very clear picture of the health of the company. So if those metrics move into the yellow, we know there's a concern. If they move into the red, we know we have a serious concern.
And when you look retrospectively at the period of concern, was there a decline in those metrics?
We just started the metrics this year.
Well, how'd you determine that those are the things that you needed to track?
We looked for metrics that would reinforce the comprehensive plan. So there were certain changes we wanted to make, and for traveled work is a perfect example because that was a big
Forgive me,
issue.
Administrator, here's what I'm driving at. You said that FAA was too static or passive in its oversight, that it was unable to adapt to change. What specific change what specific change at Boeing or its suppliers was FAA unable to either identify or able to identify and unable to adapt to?
Well, I think in this particular case, the degradation of the quality management and safety management system.
When you certify the airworthiness of an aircraft, you are also certifying the production line, is that correct?
No, I mean, the production line has been certified.
So when changes are made to the production line, when changes are made to manufacturing processes, but the airframe has not changed, are you alerted to that? Does that trigger some kind of inspection or examination or recertification related either to the airframe or to the production line?
It depends on the magnitude of the change, but there should be, a manufacturer would have a risk analysis process that would run, and that would happen before any changes were made, and we would have visibility into that.
There have been some high-profile, catastrophic Airbus accidents in the last 15 years. Air France disaster related to the design of the flight control inputs for the two pilots and a stall that resulted. So there have been significant safety concerns as well on the other side of the Atlantic. How does the European approach to fulfilling the same obligations that you have for safety differ from the U.S. approach? In what ways might it be better, and in what ways might it be inferior?
I don't know. I don't have specifics to share with you on that. I can say that we do benchmark against, for example, number of airworthiness directives and that type of thing, and we seem to be largely tracking along the same lines. But I can follow up with any additional information.
You don't have a sense of how, philosophically or by design or the structure of your authorities, failures at FAA?
It depends on what you're referring to specifically. I think with MCAS, I wouldn't necessarily say so, but we did not have
I think what I'm referring to, so I think that the events that we're, the chairman, the scope of the inquiry, as I understand it, we have MCAS with failure to disclose to FAA and failure to disclose to carriers and flight crews, and we have, I think, evidence of quality control failures, as well as the accumulation of a culture that made it difficult for leadership or regulators to understand where corners are being cut. Is that a fair characterization, Mr. Chairman?
I think it certainly is.
So is the fact that that happened, or is alleged to have happened or may have happened, does that reflect a failure or potential failure by the FAA?
It's certainly enough of a circumstance to cause me to relook at how we're doing oversight and try to improve that.
Thank you, Administrator.